A couple of times each week, I feel like lunch is just an afterthought where I quickly grab a sandwich or mindlessly munch on some mediocre leftovers. On today's episode of Paula Roy's Favorite Foods, I'm going to show you 3 dishes that are going to have you looking forward to lunch. Our first recipe makes fantastic use of leftover baked potatoes. Of course, if you don't have any, you can just bake some for this dish. This fully loaded baked potato chowder is an absolute family favorite in my house. So we're going to start, of course, with our potatoes. I baked up 4 big ones and I scooped them out, so I've got a lovely bowl of fluffy baked potato here. You want to make sure you cook them thoroughly so that there's no hard bits inside. It's not a problem to leave them in the oven an extra 10 or 15 minutes. I don't recommend microwaving them, as I find that baked potatoes done that way tend to be a little bit soggy on the inside. And then scoop the skins out as best you can. I try not to pierce the outside of the skin, and I do leave a little bit of potato inside because later I'm going to stuff these with some cheese and sauteed onions and bake them and then dip them in sour cream for a really delicious snack. So don't throw out your skins when you're making this dish. So a chowder usually has a creamy base, and that's what we're going to do here, but not one that's rich with heavy cream. It's a milk-based one. So we're going to start by making the flour and fat base of a white sauce. And what I have done is sauteed some bacon in this pan. Sometimes you will use that with leftover drippings from roasting a chicken or whatever, but this is going to be tasty because we've got bacon bits as one of our toppings. So I'm going to sprinkle in some white flour. Just a little bit more flour than fat is usually the ratio that you want. And then you need to make sure that you cook the flour. Otherwise, it actually is going to taste kind of raw in the sauce. So just whisk it around so that it absorbs the fat. And then it's about 2 minutes, I would say, to cook it up. You want to make sure that you get rid of all the lumps that are in there. Kind of like playing hockey, you got to get into the corners. And if it weren't a bacon fat based roux or base that we're making, you would actually smell the flour starting to cook. It smells a lot like cookies baking, and then you know it's gotten past that raw stage. Of course, there's nothing wrong with raw flour. It's not going to hurt you to eat it, but it's just going to taste so much better this way. So it should be bubbling a little bit, which we've got going on now. And again, keep stirring it. And then the next part of making a sauce like this is to add in your liquid base. And as mentioned, we're going to be using milk. You could use a combination of milk and cream, but I find with the potatoes that makes for a chowder that's a bit heavier than I would prefer. Now the secret when you go to add your milk, once the flour has been well cooked, is to make sure you don't add it too quickly. And the same goes if you were adding chicken stock to a base like this to make a gravy, for example. So I'm just going to start pouring it in a bit at a time. Left-handed pour, super challenging for me. See if we can do that without spilling too much. Then whisk it thoroughly. Your goal is to try and make a sauce with no lumps in it. However, if for some reason you struggle with this, just keep going, and you can always strain this out into another container or back into this jug and get rid of the lumps and put it back in the pot. And again, because of the potatoes, it's going to be kind of lumpy anyway, so 1 or 2 tiny flour lumps really aren't going to make a big difference. My sauce is looking nice and smooth. I'm very happy with it. So now I can go ahead and add the rest of the milk. So I'm going to start by chopping the chives. If you ever watch a cooking show that's restaurant-based, you'll notice that they cut the chives as infinitesimally small as possible. That was a hard lesson for me to learn when I was helping out in a restaurant kitchen a few years ago. I find home cooks tend to chop them, myself included, a lot bigger than this, but they do look really pretty when they're really small. And chop as much as you think you need for the number of servings that you're going to be dishing out that particular day. And into the bowl with these. And we'll just set the rest aside. And I'm going to clear my board off because we're going to use it to grate some cheese. But before we do that, I'm going to check my sauce. Hasn't come to a boil yet, but almost. And I just put some chives in there. Definitely need to move the whisk. There we go. I'm going to turn it up a little bit. And you can use whatever cheese you like. Orange cheese, orange cheddar certainly looks really pretty on top of the chowder, but I'm a real big sucker for extra old cheddar, so I'm going to go ahead and grate that because that's what my family likes a whole lot. And if you saw an earlier episode, you'll know that if you have trouble grating cheddar, this one's actually quite soft because it's been out of the fridge for a little while. A great trick is to freeze the block first for about 15 minutes, and then it will just be so easy to grate. I've heard people say you could also put a little vegetable oil or butter on the grater. I haven't personally tried that, but I think that probably makes sense because the cheese would just slide against the grater really nicely. Okay, so we'll just leave our cheese there on the board. Crumble this little piece up that fell off. There we go. So now we've got a really nice array of toppings for our chowder. Okay, I'm liking the thickening action that I'm seeing now. So we're going to add the potatoes and do it carefully. Obviously, the liquid is very hot, so you just want to scoop it in and try not to splash yourself or anyone who's nearby. That's a lot of flesh from those 4 potatoes, so it is worth it to look for larger ones. And if you can find potatoes that are not new ones, as in recently harvested crop, you're going to find that they have a better texture. Not to mention that the skins get a little bit thicker as they age, and so they're much better for stuffing and baking. The new ones, the skins are just so thin. They have a delightful flavor all their own, but they're not as good for this application. So we're going to turn this heat off. We're going to grab our ladle and our bowl, and we're going to dish it up. And if you are concerned or alarmed about the pieces of potato in it, remember that it is a chowder. It's not meant to be a finely pureed soup. You absolutely could puree it. It would be not a chowder then. Chowders, when you think of fish chowders and corn chowders, they always have appealing pieces or chunks of either fish or meat or vegetables in them. Give the bowl a wipe. There we go. And now we get to add our toppings. I think I'm going to start with the cheese because I really want it to melt into my bowl. And then I'm going to go bacon bit next and kind of scatter that around. And I just love watching them get right in there with the chowder. It's going to make every bite all the way through the bowl taste so good. Sour cream next. I often like to put a big dollop kind of right in the middle, and then as you scoop your way through the bowl, you can just keep reaching into that section in the middle and grab some more. And last but not least, our finely minced chives. And then if you're going for the artsy look, you can scatter a couple more bacon bits on top of the sour cream to remind yourself that they're hiding under there waiting for you. And there's my fully loaded baked potato chowder, ready to take your lunchtime from boring to beautiful.
I love lunches that can be prepared ahead of time and are perfectly packable too, just like the next recipe I'm going to show you. It's a fun twist on mini pizzas, and it's as nutritious as it is flavorful.
If your freezer's anything like mine, you probably have multiple cartons of ice cream or gelato on the go all the time. I've got a solution to keep it fresh and keep ice crystals from building up on top. Just take a sheet of plastic wrap, spread it over, press it down over the scooped surface, put the lid on, and it'll be as good as new for months. I love lunches that are just as good the next day and the day after and the day after. And that's the case with these little mini pizza quiches. My kids used to love them straight from the freezer to their lunchbox. They'd be thawed by lunchtime, and they're just a snap to put together. So I'm going to start by getting the fillings ready. We've got green onion and green pepper and pepperoni to chop up. I like these little thin pepperettes because you want the pieces pretty small. Our pre-made tart shells are quite small. And you could saute up other things if you wanted cooking onions, if you wanted mushrooms. The mushrooms are hard to put in raw because they do release a lot of moisture and it can make your little quiches a bit soggy. So I went with fillings that don't need to be pre-cooked. And obviously you can choose mild or spicy pepperoni. If your family likes things on the hotter side, you could use a nice spicy salami, ham, bacon. I would definitely pre-cook the bacon, whatever you want. And naturally, no meat at all is a terrific option. Just looking at how much we need for our 12 shells, I think I'll do both of these pepperoni sticks. Tempting though it might be to overload the pastry shells, you really can't do that because you have to leave room for the egg part, which is what makes them quiches and not just little baby pizzas. So I'm going to put these in my bowl just because it's easier to work with when it comes time to fill the shells. And we've already got our mozzarella cheese grated. If you prefer a combination cheese, like they sell bags of pre-grated pizza cheeses, that's a super option as well. Some people like to throw a little Parmesan in the mix. Great. I wouldn't necessarily go with a Swiss cheese, which is often used in quiche, just because it's going to take away from the pizza flavor profile that we're working towards here. I really like onion flavor on my pizza, so that's why I'm including green onion in these ones. And finally, a little bit of green pepper. You want to dice that quite small so that it has a chance to cook in the hot egg and cream mixture. One little seed there I'm going to fish out if I can. There we go. Nothing wrong with eating the seeds, but sometimes people seem to be bothered by them. I think that's probably all the pepper that we need. Goes without saying that if you're not making this ahead and you want to have a little assembly party with the other members of your family, you can pre-chop all these things and just tuck them in the fridge until you're ready to do the assembly. I've got my oven preheating. It should be up to temperature in just a moment or two so that as soon as the quiches are assembled, I can pop them right in. Look at that. I couldn't even see, or maybe I have eyes in the back of my head. All right, now it's time to get the egg and cream mixture ready. So for this quantity of 12 pastry shells, 3 eggs should be sufficient. And as I've mentioned before, these have been out of the fridge for a little while because I find that they're much easier to beat when they're not icy cold from the fridge. So we're just going to give them a little whisk. I always stab the yolks first just to speed things up. Now we're going to add in some heavy cream, about 1/3 of a cup. You could absolutely use milk if you prefer. And just beat it until it's reasonably well combined. Add a few grinds of salt and pepper. I always say salt and pepper and I reach for the pepper first. I don't know why that is. And some Italian seasonings to fit with our pizza flavor. So I've got some dried basil here and some dried oregano. You could put in chopped fresh basil if you had that on hand. One last little whisk. All right, so we're going to set the egg and cream aside for the moment because what we want to do is put all our other toppings in the bottom of the shells and then put the egg on top. And that's pretty typical for quiche assembly in a lot of cases. I'm actually going to put the cheese on the bottom, just a little sprinkle. If there's cheese left over and there's room in your shells, you can always put an extra little sprinkle on top. All right, and I guess I'll do pepperoni next. My hands are clean, so I'm just going to sprinkle it in. And like I said, reduce or avoid the temptation to overload them. Everything's so yummy, all these toppings, that you think you want a lot, but by the time we put all of them in, we do need to save room for the egg mixture. This is a great dish to make with kids because they can easily assemble if you give them the right parameters, like 4 pepperonis and 4 green peppers, give them a measuring spoon for the cheese and so on. They can have great success filling these and feel really proud of themselves for having helped make something that is so tasty. It'd be a fun twist on a pizza party for a gathering of kids as well. Now, a couple of green peppers. And I know it looks like these shells are getting really full, but don't worry, the egg mixture does filter down around all of these toppings quite nicely. And you could use this same approach to make a larger size pizza quiche, either with a homemade pastry shell or a purchased one. Obviously, the baking time would be longer for that. And just a little scattering of onion for each one. There we go. So looks like a lot of work, but it doesn't take that long to fill them. Now we're going to add our egg mixture. I'm going to give it just one more little whisk to make sure it's well blended. And then I find the best tool for filling these shells is a small cookie scoop, because you can really hold the right amount of liquid and it's got really good aim. So I'm going to go with 1 scoop for each one, and then I know I'm going to have to go back and do a second. But that way it gets its time to filter down to the bottom, as I mentioned before. And don't worry if you drip a little bit, that's part of the reason why I always line my pans with parchment. It just makes the cleanup so much easier. And you're not going to get stuck on things that are impossible to get off your baking tray. Looks like my 3 egg estimate is going to hold up. If you wanted to use something like prosciutto as your meat for this, I would recommend either baking the sheets of prosciutto and crumbling them, or chopping them and pan frying them ahead of time. It's going to have a much better flavor. Okay, now we'll go on to round 2 for the ones that are not quite full. My scoop size wasn't completely consistent, so some are more full than others. And remember that, as with all egg fillings, they are going to puff up a little bit as they're baking, so you don't want to overfill them. And what I'm going to do with these ones is put them in the oven, and I'm going to let them almost finish cooking, and then I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of cheese on for the last 2 or 3 minutes of cooking. All right, so our mini pizza quiches are ready to go in the oven, and they'll bake for about 15 minutes. All right, I've just pulled our mini pizza quiches out of the oven, and they look so good. You can see I added a little more cheese on top just before, about the last 2 minutes of baking, and they smell great. I like to serve them with pizza sauce. You can put a dollop on top, because of course, what's pizza without sauce? And here's another hot tip. If you think your family might turn their noses up at the word quiche, just call these mini pizza pies, because it is a pie shell, and they will gobble them up.
If you aren't familiar with the word crudo, get ready for a little delicious enlightenment. It's the Italian word for raw food, whether it's meat, vegetables, or fish. My next recipe is tuna crudo, and it's as refreshing and delightful as you can possibly imagine.
So you want to make sure you use good quality fish for this dish, particularly because it is eaten raw. Now, I always get mine from a reputable fishmonger. There's lots in town, and you just ask for ahi tuna, and they can cut you whatever size piece you'd like. And despite the prices that you might see for tuna in restaurants, it's extremely affordable to purchase to work with at home. So I've frozen this piece. That's recommended from a safety perspective, but also I find it much easier to work with this way. It's just partially thawed, and now it's going to be easy for me to slice into about, I would say, 1/3 of an inch pieces. You can slice them thinner if that's your preference. This just is the thickness that I really like. And while I'm offering this as a lunch dish for you today, it also makes a stellar appetizer. When I'm having people over, I'll prepare each person their own individual plate, and they just gobble it up. It's always a big, big, big hit. Obviously, if you're thinking about this in warm weather, you want to make sure that the fish doesn't sit out for any length of time in the heat. All right, so now we're going to fan our slices out on a plate, and you want them in a single layer because that way every single slice is going to get some of the delicious lemon and olive oil vinaigrette on it. Oop, didn't quite cut through that one. I've made the pieces bite-sized because that's what I prefer. You could even make them a bit smaller than this if you like, but to me this is a really good cracker to tuna ratio. And these two little odd bits will just tuck in the middle. They're perfectly edible. They just didn't turn out as flat as the others because they were on the end. All right, so now we need some delicious toppings. We'll start with making our vinaigrette and then we'll get the other things ready. As I mentioned, it's a nice lemon vinaigrette, so I'm going to squeeze some lemon juice into this cup, and then I'm going to put it into my dressing bottle. Just moving this away because I don't want to spray too much lemon on it. And I never know how juicy lemons are going to be. I'm sure you've had that experience where some are terrific and some just are not. So I usually buy an extra one just in case if I know that I want a certain quantity for a recipe. They do keep in the fridge for a pretty long time. For this recipe, I like a lot of dressing on it. It's kind of nice to be able to scoop some over each bite as you go to eat it. I'm happy with that. Just move that aside. So we're going to put that in our shaker jar. And the only other thing that's going in there is some olive oil. Give that a shake. And absolutely this part can be done ahead of time. You really do want to slice the tuna close to serving time if you can. All right, that's great. So now for our various little toppings, I've got some flaky salt here because I really like that. A few hot pepper flakes. You could also very thinly sliver a Thai chili, a bird's eye chili if you like. I've got some finely minced chives because I love the flavor and the pop of color you get from that. And also some capers because I find that the briny flavor works really well with the fish. But because they're so large and they roll around like little baby bowling balls, I'm going to chop them a bit first so that they sit on top of the tuna without trying to run away. And not trying to mince them too finely, but if you can get most of them in half, you're going to have a good distribution of capers on your dish. So I'm going to start by adding our dressing. And like I said, I like a lot. If you just want yours lightly dressed, then you don't need to make this much. And try and get some on each piece of fish. There we go. Oh, a little bit more over there. I can see that one. You'll want a plate that's nice and flat, obviously, but also one with a little bit of a rim so that the dressing doesn't just roll right off the plate. Now we'll add our capers. And if you've ever wondered when you see the videos of people sprinkling stuff from up high, it actually works. It's hard with a wet thing like this, but chefs do it because you get a better distribution over the surface area. I always thought it was just something people did for show, but there's actually a reason for it. And now our chives. And the little bits of chives look nice when they're sort of decorating the rim of the plate as well. Try and make sure every piece has some on it. And the chili flakes, I use those judiciously. They are very hot, but they add just a really nice tone to the dish. And last but not least, our salt. Drying my fingers here so I can sprinkle it from high. So now when I go to serve this dish, I've got my crostini here, also terrific on rice crackers, which you can find almost anywhere. And I like to give each person a little fork and spoon so they can spear some tuna onto their own plate and then scoop up some more sauce to put on it and enjoy it. So there you go, tuna crudo, a fabulously delicious and easy lunch. If you're ready to let lunchtime become the highlight of your day, I highly recommend you check out one of these great recipes. This fully loaded baked potato chowder is awesome. These pizza quiches are just so much fun to make and even more fun to eat. And of course, tuna crudo is just going to give your body and your brain a great boost.